Martin, for another crew to become the dominant force.
Yeah, and that other crew may well be two Kiwis, John Story and Chris Harris in lane 3. Next to them, the Poles, Zitarski and Bixup. They won their semi-final. But let's go through the lane introductions. The two men from the Swiss quad, Barnaby Delars in the bow seat. On the right of your picture, Roman Roijli, the stroke of the Swiss double. We'll see a lot of them. They finished third in the semi behind the Poles. Then this Belarusian double, which has really done well to come into the final. The Belarusians came 6th in the Europeans, but showed real pace to finish second behind these two guys. John Story in the bow seat, Chris Harris in stroke. Lovely lad, John Story. I travelled down on the bus with him yesterday. He was actually born in Cambridge, Britain, and lived there for 13 years, Hamish.
Yeah, he's still got a little bit of a British accent if you listen out for it, but he's definitely a New Zealander.
So the Poles, Miroslav Zitarski, Mateusz Bixup, and there are the Italians. Didn't have a great Henley, lost the Italian lightweights, but Filippo Mondelli and Luca Rambaldi have got their act together to come into the finals here at Lucerne World Cup 3. The Argentines, Rodrigo Murillo and Cristian Rosso, closest to us. No strangers to the international range, seeing that Argentine double. Just missed out on qualifying for the Olympic regatta. So if we see this race played out like the races in Poznan or even the races at Henley, we'll see these two men in front at the first quarter, Hamish.
I think the double is a boat that you really want to get a good quick start. Looking at the splits from years past, it is usually the crew who's in front at the first 500 does go on to win. I guess it's been the Sinkovic brothers for so many years that's been the case. But you've seen the field behind the Sinkovic brothers in the men's double has been really condensed and swapping places left, right and centre for a number of years. So quite an even field here, I believe.
So there's New Zealand pretty much level with the Poles and the Italians. You can see the stern of the Polish boat there and the Italian boat, and on that far side, a little slower start from the Belarusians. There's the Swiss, top of your picture, Barnaby Delazare, the 23-year-old, well, they're both 23, Roman Roijli in the stroke seat. Expect them to figure in the second part of the race, but it is the Kiwis with, what, half a metre lead over the Poles, Italy in third place.
Yeah, well, Chris Harris has a fair bit of experience in this boat now, having rowed in it with Robbie Manson for the last couple of years. John Story came out of the men's quad, a tough campaign last year, culminating in the Olympic Games with a late call-up due to the withdrawal of the Russians through doping violations. But yeah, you can see New Zealand has a good wee lead here, 130 to the 500. That's not hanging about. That's fair moving, especially in these somewhat dead conditions.
Yeah, still conditions here on the Rothsay, but it's the New Zealand double coached by Calvin Ferguson, who of course has taken New Zealand doubles to Olympic gold medals in London 2012. There you see the British-born John Story. His parents moved out. His dad really is involved with Antarctica and study of Antarctica. That's why they moved to New Zealand, where the study takes place. And Chris Harris, who of course has recovered from, I think, the tenosynovitis, or the operation that he had that affected him so much in that double with Robbie Manson in Rio.
Yeah, he had a few issues in Rio, and I know they carried on. He had an interrupted summer back home in New Zealand, but you can see he's really done some work to be in this shape at this time of the year. These two guys are out-and-out workers. It's sort of well known. I did a fair bit of time in the single back in New Zealand, and I had many a paddle battle against John Story and Chris Harris, two guys who do not want to give up. They will push right to the line on a 20k row, and they'll take that into your racing. I've always found generally a rower, their racing performance is just a reflection of their training performance. There's very few athletes out there who are just racers, you know. I think you have to be a trainer as well in order to be a good racer.
So coming to 1,000 metres, the Kiwis have had a great first two quarters, but it's tightening up as we go into the third quarter, because the two Poles, Zitarski and Bixup, both from that quadruple scull that finished fourth, have come out of that boat, and Alexander Wojciechowski has decided this will be the top Polish boat, and they are tracking the Kiwis stroke for stroke. And then the Italians, well, Luca Rambaldini, the tall man in the stroke seat, has got his head together from that race at Henley where they lost the Italian lightweights. Then his head went down. Filippo Mondelli, the Italian bowman who's staying in our hotel, he told me the stroke man has got his head together and they're now much better. You can see the performance improvement of the Italians. Well, they're just like 2/3 of a length down on the Kiwis. Italians moving up. This is a great skull from the European champions from Italy. Neither of these two men in Rio, but they are tracking the leaders.
Yeah, it'll be a case of who's done the work in the first 1,000 and who's got any speed left in the second. I think all medals are still open to these three crews. The gold, silver, bronze likely to come from these three crews. But I think New Zealand's still moving very smoothly. Not a laboured stroke, still nice and lively. Not too tense there. You can see John Story having a couple of words to Chris Harris there. Probably just a technical point, I would say. And Chris, although there's a little bit of strain coming in there, still relatively clean and smooth.
So the Poles are making inroads into that Kiwi lead. There's the Swiss. I think they're in 4th or 5th place at the moment. Understandably, the Swiss TV coverage looking at them, hoping for a charge at the finish. But it's so tight, isn't it? Just half a length lead. The Italians have come right into 2nd place. Mondelli and Rambaldini really getting their act together. The Swiss aren't going to medal here. And there's the doubles at the back of the field. Looking at the splits for the last quarter, Hamish, I see that the Poles had a second quicker split than the Kiwis in the semi-final. Does that matter at all?
No, I think it's a new race. You don't know what people have done earlier and how hard they've worked earlier in the race. I know the Italians, the way they train, they'll be used to having to sprint after having already worked incredibly hard for a large distance. So I would back them to be able to chuck some strokes at it at the finish. I don't know too much about the Polish, and I also know that the New Zealand double can sprint hard as well.
So there you see the sprint is starting now. The crew's coached by Kiwi Calvin Ferguson, and no strangers to high rating. And there, well, John Story and Chris Harris have switched into their overdrive rate, but they've got to because they know the danger from the Poles on their left shoulder, and the Italians, one lane over from them, is coming. I think that's a race-winning lead at this point, Hamish.
Yeah, only 100 metres to go to the line at this point, and these two guys are very tough. You know, they won't relent. I've been in sprint battles with these two over the years, and you will see it. They'll come down to the line there, just holding on to that margin. I think it's too much to do now for the Poles, who have perhaps rode the Italians to a standstill by the looks of it for the silver medal. Bronze going to Italy.
4th place, the Swiss will cross the line just ahead of the Belarusians. One better, I think, than the place they finished in the Europeans. And we'll wait for the Argentine double to finish the course. They are just paddling light and going to drift across the line. There's their bows now. But I think that's the closest the Kiwis have been pushed this season. They were dominant at Henley, dominant at Poznan. And boy, they know they've been in a race there.
Yeah, I think you find that in the double field a lot. There's not often any of the medal getters get to the finish with a comfortable lead, apart from perhaps the Sinkovic brothers. And you'll see that again today. Everyone had to really work for it to secure the medal spots or the medal position that they got. A really pleasing victory, I'm sure, for Chris and John. Again, perhaps not the perfect build-up, but a great confidence boost going back home to New Zealand. And you can see the start there, nice and smooth. It's about building boat speed and being able to settle onto a rhythm without getting too much stress and chaos coming out of the start.
So a look there at the Kiwi stroke man, Chris Harris from Wanganui.
Yeah, nice and smooth around the back, not leaning back too much and really relying on that punch in the middle of the stroke to generate that boat speed and not killing it off.
Great middle 1,000 from Miroslav Zitarski. On the right of your picture, Mateusz Biczap on the left, the two Poles out of the quad that took 4th place in the Olympics. They took a silver in that first World Cup in Belgrade. They've set up for silver in the second at Lucerne, and wow, well, it's a much better performance from these men. Luca Rambaldi, closest to you, gave their all at the finish. Filippo Mondelli, the bowman, they just drifted across the line when they knew silver was out of reach.
Yeah, a lot of history in the event for Italy, and it's great to have some new faces back on the medal podium here in Lucerne. So very pleasing results for them, no doubt.
So we will have confirmation of the results, and I think those times are getting a little quicker. 6:10, just well, what, 11 seconds off the world's best time mark, and we have been seeing 14 and 15. So I think the course is speeding up. Satarski and